Sarah hadn't touched that shelf for nearly 2 years, not since the day she rearranged the books after Max left. But today, her fingers brushed against something wedged behind a faded volume of Jane Austen, a forgotten photograph slipping softly into her lap. Max stared back at her from the image, his eyes gentle and trusting, and suddenly she was flooded by all the mornings he'd waited by the door, his tail thumping softly against the wooden floor, eager and patient as only a dog could be. She felt a tightening in her chest, the quiet kind of sadness that doesn't burst into tears but settles softly, almost warmly, around your heart. She whispered softly into the empty room, half smiling through her ache. How could something so small bring back so many feelings? Have you ever found a forgotten memory hidden between pages? Tell me about your moment below. Sarah Williams lived on Elm Street, in a modest white clapboard house shaded by a maple tree whose leaves turned fiery every October. The house wasn't grand, but each corner spoke softly of comfort and quiet solitude. From outside, anyone walking past could easily imagine a serene woman, content in her neat little home, reading novels by lamplight with a cup of tea steaming gently beside her. What the neighbors couldn't see was that every morning, almost without fail, Sarah still made 2 cups of coffee out of habit. One remained untouched on the kitchen table, a silent ritual she hadn't yet found the heart to change. Her days unfolded gently in a rhythm familiar to anyone who knew small-town life. She ran the cozy bookshop down by the harbor, greeted customers by name, and recommended books as though handing over pieces of herself. But behind the warmth she showed the world lay a quiet, unresolved sadness, a void left by David's absence, and now even more sharply felt since Max had gone too. Her radio, stubbornly set to a local station that rarely played anything newer than the mid-90s, provided soft companionship during dinners eaten alone at the kitchen counter, its gentle hum mingling with her quiet breaths. On Sunday afternoons, Sarah sat by the window, letting her gaze drift toward the small patch of grass where Max once lay basking in the sun. His favorite spot, now empty, seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something or someone to return. She knew her friends, Anna from the bakery and Helen next door, understood her better than she ever voiced, but even their warm smiles couldn't entirely reach the corners of her solitude. It was her daughter, Emma, who called regularly from New York, urging Sarah gently to open herself again to life's possibilities. Sarah listened, smiled softly into the phone, and always promised to try, though both knew words came easier than actions. In quiet moments, Sarah wondered how many others carried these unseen rituals and silent losses behind their calm facades. As she placed yet another untouched coffee cup into the sink, she couldn't help but reflect deeply. Perhaps everyone had their own version of an empty chair or an untouched drink, and perhaps sharing these quiet sorrows could somehow ease their silent weight. Do you still carry habits from someone you loved? Share your story with me below. I'd love to know I'm not alone. Sarah had been expecting a delivery, a small shipment of vintage poetry collections she'd ordered for the bookshop, but when the courier handed over a box labeled in David's familiar handwriting, her heart skipped uncomfortably. She stood in the doorway long after the courier had disappeared down Elm Street, holding the parcel with a hesitation born of caution and quiet longing. She hadn't expected anything from David, especially since he'd moved away to Boston months ago. Communication between them had gradually faded, replaced by polite texts about Max, each message shorter and more distant than the last, until eventually silence became their new normal. Carrying the box into the living room, she placed it, gingerly on the coffee table where it sat for several long minutes. Sarah moved around it cautiously, tidying things that didn't need tidying, rearranging cushions on the sofa, watering a plant she'd watered just yesterday, anything to delay the moment she knew would inevitably come. Finally, exhaling softly, she sat down and carefully sliced open the packaging tape with an old letter opener, a Christmas gift from David years ago that she'd stubbornly kept, pretending it was for its practicality rather than sentimentality, as so. She lifted the cardboard flaps, a gentle aroma wafted upwards, a mixture of faint cedar wood and the unmistakable scent of dog fur. She recognized it immediately, the distinct smell of their shared past. Inside were carefully packed belongings, Max's belongings, a worn blue leash, a few toys frayed at the edges, a favorite chew toy shaped like a bone, and an unopened bag of peanut butter biscuits, Max's all-time favorite snack. Sarah's fingers trembled lightly as she lifted each item from the box, placing them carefully on the table as though assembling pieces of a fragile puzzle she'd almost forgotten how to solve. Beneath everything, folded neatly in a Ziploc bag, was an old sweater. David had worn countless chilly autumn afternoons when they walked Max through the town's winding lanes. She gently unsealed the bag, breathing in the faint, familiar scent. Time seemed to ripple around her, softly carrying her back to an evening when the three of them had wandered along the beach, Max bounding ahead, carefree and joyful. David's laughter ringing clear and untroubled. Sarah could almost feel the chill of the evening breeze again, hear the soft murmur of the waves, see the way David turned to smile at her under the pale twilight. In that instant, she realized how thoroughly she'd tried to bury these memories beneath the routine of everyday life, hoping their absence would ease the quiet ache. Yet here they were, resurfacing effortlessly through the most mundane objects, proving she hadn't forgotten, hadn't even truly begun to let go. At the bottom, partially hidden by the sweater, was a note in David's distinct handwriting, neat but slightly hurried, as though written quickly before he changed his mind. Sarah, I thought you might like to keep these. I couldn't bring myself to throw them away. Maybe you'll know what to do with them better than I ever could. Take care, David. Sarah sat quietly for a long while, holding the note, her fingers tracing the edges of the paper as though searching for some hidden meaning or secret comfort. Outside, evening had gently descended, casting soft shadows through the curtains, yet Sarah hardly noticed. She was no longer merely unpacking a box, but unraveling layers of her heart she'd carefully wrapped away. Her mind circled around a question that had haunted her subtly ever since the quiet ending of their relationship. Was David, in sending this box, simply tidying loose ends? Or was there something else, something deeper and unsaid, threaded through these returned memories? Eventually, she stood up, gathering the items gently in her arms and carrying them into the kitchen. She placed the leash on the hook by the back door, its rightful spot as though Max might bound in at any moment, eager for a walk. The toys found their way to a basket near the fireplace, tucked among blankets and cushions, a quiet acceptance of their return, and the unopened bag of biscuits found its place in the cupboard beside a fresh pack she'd instinctively bought at the market, habitually replenishing them even when there was no longer anyone to give them to. Sarah closed the cupboard slowly, stepping back to survey her surroundings as if viewing them for the first time. Nothing outwardly had changed, yet everything within her felt subtly shifted, like the gentle movement of tectonic plates beneath the surface, barely perceptible, yet utterly transformative. This box of returned belongings had unsettled something. Deep within, opening her once more to feelings she'd diligently avoided. She knew instinctively that this quiet disruption signaled the beginning of a change she couldn't yet define, but which she sensed deeply. That night, as she lay awake listening to the soft rustle of wind through the maple leaves outside her bedroom window, Sarah understood clearly that whatever came next, her carefully constructed tranquility had been irreversibly shaken, softly but unmistakably, by this unexpected parcel of memories. Sarah lay awake in the soft darkness, eyes tracing patterns on the ceiling she'd known by heart for years, trying to imagine how she would wake tomorrow and carry on with the quiet rhythm of her life, now that these tangible echoes of Max had returned so unexpectedly. She wondered if David realized, when he sent these familiar belongings back, that he had inadvertently opened doors to memories she'd spent so much effort trying to close. This wasn't merely a reminder of what had been lost, but a subtle sign, perhaps even a gentle invitation, to accept that they hadn't truly said all they needed to say, even if it didn't mean starting over. Outside her window, the air began to cool, and stars slowly brightened against the velvety night sky, gently reminding her that time always moved forward. Life persisted quietly, insistently, and that perhaps it was finally time to face rather than flee from her past. Sarah didn't intend to revisit the box from David again. Not yet, not tonight. But sleep had fled her entirely, leaving her mind restless and buzzing with questions she couldn't quiet. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, the wool soft against her skin, and returned quietly to the living room, her steps muffled by slippers across the worn wooden floors. Moonlight pooled through the curtains, casting a gentle glow over the carefully arranged items still resting quietly where she'd left them. Her eyes lingered momentarily on the worn leash, then drifted inevitably to the small note David had sent. She picked it up once more, fingers smoothing the creased paper gently, as if her touch might coax out more of its hidden meanings. As she moved to set it aside again, something else caught her eye. Another sheet of paper, folded small and tucked almost invisibly into the corner of the box, previously unnoticed beneath layers of packing paper. Her heart gave a small, unexpected jolt, pulse quickening in confusion and tentative curiosity. Sarah unfolded the paper slowly, her breathing shallow as she recognized David's handwriting again, though this time more hesitant, less steady. It was clearly a letter he'd begun, perhaps intending to send along with the belongings, but changed his mind, tucking it away instead. She hesitated briefly, questioning whether she should read something that was never meant for her eyes. Yet, curiosity gently nudged her onward, and she began to read, each word sinking deeply into her consciousness. Sarah, I don't know if I'll ever send this, or if it's even right for me to say these things now, but I've carried this around too long to leave it unsaid. The truth is, I left not because I stopped loving you, but because I loved you too much. It sounds strange, I know, maybe cowardly. But every day I saw you losing a little more of yourself, your joy fading slowly, and I felt helpless knowing I was partly the cause. Sarah paused, her fingers trembling slightly, a deep frown of confusion knitting her brow. She had assumed their gradual distancing had been mutual, two hearts drifting quietly apart as people sometimes did. Never had she imagined David's retreat stemmed from a protective, misguided sense of responsibility toward her happiness. She read on, each line revealing more of the quiet turmoil he'd felt, the careful reasoning behind his departure becoming painfully clear. I watched you closely, Sarah. I saw you withdrawing, saw the sadness creeping in, no matter how many evenings we spent pretending everything was okay. I convinced myself you deserved someone who could make you happier, who could give you what I felt I no longer could. Max deserved stability, and so did you. But perhaps that was my biggest mistake. Assuming I knew what you needed better than you did. Sarah felt her chest tighten painfully, an ache blossoming gently, inexorably beneath her ribs. David's words reframed their entire separation, forcing her to reconsider memories she'd accepted as truths. Their silence hadn't been born of indifference, but rather a deep misunderstanding, each quietly retreating in misguided attempts to shield the other from further hurt. She leaned back heavily against the cushions, eyes tracing once more over his careful handwriting. Tears prickled the corners of her eyes, not from sadness exactly, but from an overwhelming wave of tenderness and loss. She had believed herself content with the gentle simplicity of her solitary life, yet now, reading David's hidden truths, she realized there had always been something quietly unresolved, waiting for a moment like this to finally emerge from beneath years of silence. Sarah folded the letter again carefully, pressing it softly against her chest as though she could imprint its words directly onto her heart. She sat quietly for a Long moment. The room around her gently illuminated by moonlight, her breath gradually steadying as she absorbed the gentle weight of this newfound truth. The silence was now filled not with emptiness, but with questions. Questions she couldn't yet answer. Questions about her past, about David, and above all, about herself. Sarah rose eventually, placing the letter gently atop the other belongings, knowing sleep would remain elusive for some time yet. She moved toward the kitchen, instinctively reaching for the cupboard door and pulling out the unopened bag of peanut butter biscuits. Her hand lingered there quietly, holding it loosely as her eyes drifted absently toward the window. She never expected the truth would begin with an unopened letter. Have you ever discovered something that changed your entire understanding of a past relationship? Share your story with me below. Sarah stood motionless in the quiet kitchen, the biscuit packet still resting gently in her palm, unopened and symbolic of so many things she'd left unresolved. The letter had exposed a truth she hadn't anticipated, a truth both tender and painful, reframing the entire narrative she'd built around their separation. She placed the biscuits slowly back onto the shelf, her fingers lingering as though reluctant to let go, before quietly closing the cupboard door. Returning to the living room, Sarah sat down on the sofa, drawing her legs up beneath her as she pulled a soft blanket around her shoulders. She gazed at the small pile of belongings on the table, each object now carrying a deeper significance, touched by the vulnerability of David's confession. Questions stirred within her, gentle but persistent, making it impossible to return to the comfortable simplicity she'd known before tonight. In the silence, Sarah began to recall the days leading up to their quiet farewell. She remembered those subtle evenings vividly now, dinners spent quietly picking at food, conversation waning, replaced by long silences neither knew how to fill. At the time, she'd interpreted David's quiet withdrawal as a sign that he'd gradually stopped loving her, a belief she'd internalized as an unquestioned truth, quietly reshaping her understanding of herself and their love. But now, David's words illuminated something different, a misguided act of sacrifice, a quiet misunderstanding that neither had dared to voice. She realized with a tender sadness that she had never once questioned the silence between them. Instead, she had filled those gaps with assumptions, weaving narratives that perhaps eased her sense of helplessness but obscured the truth. The quiet sacrifices they both made, thinking they protected the other, had instead quietly pulled them apart. Sarah glanced once more at David's handwritten words, the sincerity clear and gentle in each stroke of the pen, and felt a pang of longing, not necessarily to rewind time, but to speak openly with him again, to acknowledge the truths they'd left unsaid. It wasn't regret she felt now, but rather a quiet yearning for clarity and closure, for forgiveness. Not just for David, but for herself as well. Slowly, she reached for the old leash, tracing its worn texture with her fingertips, recalling afternoons spent walking Max together, David's easy laughter echoing alongside their gentle conversations about nothing and everything. Those moments had seemed trivial then, but now, through the lens of newfound understanding, she recognized their quiet significance, their precious, fleeting beauty. A faint smile touched her lips as she remembered one particular evening in late autumn, leaves crunching beneath their feet as they walked along the familiar harbor path. David had paused unexpectedly, bending down to gently brush a fallen leaf from Max's fur. In that brief instant, she had glimpsed the tenderness he often concealed behind quiet strength, yet she'd overlooked it in the rush of daily living. She wondered softly now how many other quiet moments of love she had missed, lost in assumptions and silence. Sarah drew the blanket tighter around her, finding warmth not just in its fabric, but in the gentle clarity that was beginning to settle around her heart. Perhaps the quiet rupture between them had never been an ending, but rather a necessary pause, a chance for each to rediscover their paths separately. She understood now that some truths only became clear with distance and time, their edges softened by reflection and maturity. As dawn slowly approached, casting pale, gentle streaks of light through the curtains, Sarah felt a quiet sense of peace, beginning to bloom within her. David's unsent letter had not simply revealed hidden truths about their separation. It had quietly given her permission to forgive herself, to release the burdens she'd unknowingly carried. This revelation wasn't a return to the past, but a gentle invitation toward healing, an opportunity to move forward more lightly, guided by compassion and understanding rather than regret or misunderstanding. Sarah tucked David's letter safely, away in a small drawer, beside a few other cherished keepsakes she rarely looked at but could never discard. She knew she'd revisit these words again, perhaps many times, but for now, the quiet dawn promised rest, offering a respite from the gentle upheaval the night had brought. Closing her eyes at last, Sarah allowed herself to fully accept the tenderness of David's confession. The letter had quietly unraveled her assumptions and replaced them with something deeper: truth, clarity, and perhaps most importantly, a gentle reminder that love's quietest moments were often the ones that mattered most. Have you ever uncovered truths that changed your story long after you thought it was finished? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share with me below. Sarah woke later that morning to gentle sunlight filtering softly through the curtains, casting quiet patterns across her bedspread. The night's revelations lingered at the edge of her thoughts, coloring the day ahead with a subtle, reflective hue. She stretched slowly, feeling the gentle stiffness in her joints that reminded her how long she'd lain awake, lost in contemplation. But today, something within her felt subtly different. A new openness that replaced her usual guarded calm. After a cup of coffee, which she deliberately prepared just for herself this morning, a small, conscious decision marking a quiet step forward, Sarah stepped outside into the fresh air. Autumn had begun to make its presence known, leaves gently rustling in the breeze and the air cool enough to raise goosebumps on her arms. She decided impulsively to take a walk, the leash David returned hanging loosely in her grasp as if Max might still appear at her side, eager and joyful. Her feet carried her along the familiar harbor path, each step bringing quiet echoes of days past. Sarah paused briefly, looking out across the serene expanse of water, where boats bobbed softly on gentle waves. She remembered vividly the countless afternoons she'd stood here with David, Max darting playfully nearby. Those simple moments had been taken for granted then, absorbed casually into everyday life. Now their significance resonated deeply, each memory treasured anew. As she stood lost in thought, Anna's familiar voice drew her gently back into the present. "Sarah? I almost didn't recognize you, standing so still. Everything okay?" Sarah smiled, warmly, grateful for the comforting presence of her closest friend. Anna always had an uncanny ability to appear precisely when needed, her kindness and intuition woven seamlessly into the fabric of their friendship. Sarah nodded softly, though a shadow of uncertainty flickered across her face. "I'm all right," Sarah began, hesitant yet needing to share. "David sent me a box of Max's things. There was also a letter, one he wrote but never sent. I never realized he left because he thought he was protecting me." Anna listened attentively, her eyes gentle and understanding. "Sometimes," she responded softly after a thoughtful pause, "the people we love most make choices they think will shield us, without realizing those choices become barriers instead." Sarah sighed, turning back toward the sea, her eyes tracing the distant horizon as Anna's words settled gently within her. "I wonder how much more we misunderstood," she murmured quietly, almost to herself. "Maybe we never really knew each other's hearts. Not fully." Anna placed a comforting hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Maybe. But the important thing now isn't what you didn't say then. It's what you choose to do now. Life doesn't stop giving second chances, Sarah. if we're brave enough to recognize them. Sarah felt Anna's quiet wisdom settle deeply into her thoughts, knowing instinctively her friend was right. As they parted ways with gentle promises to meet again soon, Sarah walked slowly toward the small cafe near the harbor where Helen, her elderly neighbor, often spent her mornings. Helen sat by the window, her delicate fingers wrapped carefully around a steaming cup of tea, watching the world move gently by outside. Her face lit up when Sarah approached, a smile spreading warmly across her features. "Well, if it isn't my favorite bookstore owner, come sit, child. Tell me what's troubling you." Sarah settled into the seat opposite Helen, the comforting familiarity of the older woman's presence bringing unexpected tears softly to the surface. "David wrote me a letter," Sarah admitted quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "It changed everything I believed about why we parted ways. I feel so lost, Helen, as though I've wasted years misunderstanding the person I once loved most." Helen studied her gently, understanding clear in the depths of her eyes. "Sweetheart, we all misunderstand each other at times. What matters isn't that we misunderstood, but what we choose to do with the truth once we find it. Have you considered reaching out to David again?" Sarah hesitated, gently tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "I'm afraid," she confessed quietly. "Afraid of opening old wounds, afraid of rejection, or perhaps even more afraid that some feelings might still be there, unchanged despite the passing years." Helen nodded slowly, her eyes filled with gentle compassion. "Fear is understandable, Sarah, but regret can linger much longer than fear. If there's even a chance something beautiful could come from speaking your truth, isn't it worth the risk?" Sarah sat quietly, absorbing Helen's gentle wisdom, her heart slowly warming to the possibility that perhaps not every goodbye had to remain final, and not every misunderstanding irreparable. As she left the cafe, Sarah felt a quiet determination beginning to form, tempered by caution, but guided by hope. She understood clearly that this was a crossroads, not one defined by dramatic gestures or impulsive decisions, but by gentle bravery and quiet honesty. On her way home from the cafe, Sarah's phone vibrated gently in her pocket, pulling her back from her thoughts. She saw Emma's name glowing softly on the screen, a quiet wave of comfort washing over her as she answered. "Mom, how are you?" Emma's voice, warm and clear, filled the quiet street as Sarah walked slowly beneath the rustling leaves. Sarah hesitated briefly, then chose honesty over the usual calm reassurance. "I've had an emotional few days, Em," she admitted gently. "Your dad sent some of Max's things, along with a letter. It revealed things I never understood." Emma was quiet for a thoughtful moment. Sarah could almost see her daughter's brow furrowing gently as she considered her mother's words carefully. Finally, Emma spoke, her voice softly encouraging. "Maybe it's time to talk, Mom. Really talk. Not just politely updating each other, but truly reconnecting. Life's too short to carry around misunderstandings." Sarah smiled softly at the wisdom her daughter had quietly acquired over the years. Despite the physical distance between them, Emma had grown into someone deeply insightful, someone Sarah could genuinely lean on. "How did you get to be so wise?" Sarah asked warmly, a gentle pride shining through her voice. Emma laughed quietly, a sound that warmed Sarah's heart. "I had a good example, even if she doesn't always realize how brave she is. Mom, if you think talking to Dad again might help you heal, you should. Do it for you, not for him or anyone else." Sarah let the conversation gently guide her steps homeward, comforted by Emma's support. When they ended the call, she felt a quiet resolve settling more deeply inside her. Still, doubt lingered subtly at the edges, a reminder of the complexities woven into every decision. Back at the bookstore that afternoon, Sarah busied herself organizing shelves and greeting regular customers, each interaction gentle and familiar, yet tinged now with quiet introspection. As evening approached, she found herself alone again, surrounded by rows of comforting stories, each book containing worlds simpler and clearer than her own. She picked up an old novel, a love story she'd read countless times, and leafed absently through its pages. A small slip of paper fell softly onto the floor, and she bent to retrieve it, recognizing immediately David's neat, familiar script. It was an old note he'd tucked into the book long ago, one she'd entirely forgotten. "Sarah, this reminded me of us. Imperfect but beautiful. Love, D." The simple sentence unraveled her carefully maintained composure, leaving her heart fluttering quietly with nostalgia. Her thoughts drifted gently back to evenings they'd spent curled together on the sofa, Max sleeping contentedly at their feet, the world beyond the window fading into insignificance beside the quiet intimacy of shared silence and mutual understanding. She wondered briefly how many other small notes, forgotten gestures, and quiet proofs of affection lay hidden within their shared history, tokens she'd overlooked, dismissed as insignificant. Perhaps love wasn't only grand declarations, but also these quiet moments, easily forgotten until rediscovered through the gentle filter of hindsight. Lost in contemplation, Sarah barely noticed when the shop door quietly opened, a subtle bell, tinkling to announce another visitor. She turned and saw Anna standing there again, smiling gently. "I had a feeling you might still be here," Anna said softly, approaching her friend with a knowing look. "I couldn't stop thinking about our earlier conversation." Sarah held up the forgotten note she'd just found, offering it gently toward Anna, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I just found this, hidden in a book. Another small piece of our past. It makes me wonder. How much did I overlook, Anna? How much did we both overlook?" Anna took the paper gently, reading the brief message with quiet understanding. "Perhaps the smallest gestures hold the deepest truth, Sarah. Maybe the love you shared with David wasn't something lost, just quietly misplaced." Sarah sighed gently, leaning back against the worn wooden counter. "I don't know if I have the courage to face all this again. It's terrifying, Anna. Opening doors I thought I had closed for good." Anna placed a steadying hand on Sarah's shoulder, her expression compassionate yet firm. "But isn't the regret of never knowing even more terrifying? Whatever happens, Sarah, at least you'll have clarity. And maybe, in that clarity, you'll find peace." Sarah nodded slowly, absorbing her friend's quiet wisdom, feeling a gentle calm begin to soothe the turmoil she'd felt all day. Anna stayed a little longer, helping tidy up, neither woman speaking much more but sharing the quiet, comforting presence of long friendship. Eventually, Anna left with a promise to return soon, leaving Sarah standing quietly in the soft twilight glow of the bookstore. Closing the shop for the evening, Sarah began the gentle walk home, each step lighter despite the quiet heaviness still lingering at her heart. As darkness settled softly around her, stars slowly appearing in the velvety night sky, Sarah knew she stood quietly at the edge of something important, something she was finally brave enough to face. Later that evening, Sarah sat quietly in her living room, the room bathed softly in the amber glow of her reading lamp, feeling the quiet hum of unresolved thoughts gently vibrating beneath her skin. She had spent the better part of her day avoiding, facing the deeper implications of David's letter and the forgotten note she'd found. Yet the evening's quiet solitude left no room for avoidance. Each memory resurfacing had nudged her closer to acknowledging something she'd spent years carefully guarding herself against: the undeniable fact that, even now, the echoes of their shared life resonated deeply within her heart. Her eyes drifted again to the small collection of Max's belongings, resting gently atop the coffee table, each item a quiet symbol of a past she had long convinced herself was firmly behind her. Yet, here she was, heart quietly aching, wondering if perhaps she'd misunderstood more than just David's intentions, if perhaps she'd misunderstood herself, too. Sarah reached for her phone several times, fingers hovering uncertainly over David's contact number, still stored quietly in her device despite all the intervening silence. Her pulse quickened gently each time, courage wavering as she considered the possibility of breaking their quiet truce. Fearful, yet longing to finally speak truths long left unsaid. Unable to make the call, she stood up restlessly, moving to the window and gazing quietly out into the darkened street. Memories rose gently again, unbidden but irresistible. Quiet walks through autumn leaves, evenings spent side by side on this very sofa, David reading quietly, Max curled at their feet, the quiet ease they'd once shared filling her heart now with bittersweet longing. She found herself recalling clearly the day David first brought Max home, a tiny bundle of golden fur, squirming and playful, his joyful presence immediately stitching together parts of their relationship that had quietly frayed. Sarah remembered vividly the laughter they'd shared, the quiet nights comforting the puppy as he adjusted to their home, those moments when their simple, shared purpose had quietly strengthened their bond. She wondered gently, painfully now, how they'd drifted from that effortless closeness, how small silences had widened into chasms neither dared bridge. David's unspoken belief that he was doing the right thing by stepping away haunted her now, filling her with quiet sorrow at all the things they had allowed to remain unspoken. And yet, Sarah realized softly, she had made choices too. Quiet, unconscious decisions not to press, not to question, content instead to accept silence over confrontation. It wasn't blame she felt, but a gentle awareness that both had played a part, each quietly complicit in their slow drift apart. Her gaze returned softly to the photographs still arranged carefully on a nearby shelf, images of happier, simpler times captured quietly behind glass. One picture particularly drew her gaze. David smiling warmly at the camera, Max's paws draped lazily over his lap, both of them looking so effortlessly content, so genuinely at peace. She missed that quiet ease deeply, missed the comfort of a life that once felt uncomplicated and whole. As Sarah stood there, quietly absorbed in memory, a soft rain began gently tapping against the window pane. She watched quietly as droplets traced slow, deliberate paths down the glass, mirroring the gentle tracks of emotion she felt within herself. It was as though the world outside mirrored her quiet, internal struggle, each raindrop softly acknowledging the gentle melancholy that wrapped itself around her heart. She knew clearly, as she listened to the rain's quiet symphony, that ignoring these feelings was no longer an option. She had spent years quietly guarding herself from vulnerability, but now, standing at the window, she understood deeply that facing the truth, even truths that carried pain, was the only path forward to true healing. Slowly, with quiet resolve, Sarah picked up her phone once more, taking a gentle breath as she dialed David's number. Her heart thudded softly in her chest, a mixture of fear and anticipation mingling gently within her as she listened to each quiet ring. The line clicked softly, and David's voice filled her ear, familiar yet tentative, equally surprised and cautious. "Sarah?" She exhaled softly, heart pounding gently but firmly determined to speak honestly for once, to break their years of carefully maintained silence. "David," she began gently, her voice steady despite the quiet tremor beneath her calm surface. "I found your letter, and I think we need to talk." Silence stretched softly between them, a brief, gentle pause filled quietly with possibilities neither dared fully imagine yet. Finally, David's quiet response echoed warmly, gently across the distance. "Yes," he agreed softly, his voice carrying years of quiet emotion. "I think we do." Sarah ended the call slowly, feeling a gentle rush of relief and apprehension intertwining deeply within her heart. She sank quietly onto the sofa, her gaze drifting again to Max's belongings, understanding softly that the path ahead would not be simple. Yet for the first time in a long while, she felt truly ready to face whatever truths awaited. Quietly, she acknowledged within herself that sometimes the bravest thing one could do was simply to speak honestly, even when the outcome remained uncertain. Have you ever faced a moment when honesty changed your life's course forever? I'd love to hear your experience. Share with me below. The days passed gently yet uneasily, each one quietly carrying Sarah closer to the reunion she had both anticipated and feared. Their brief phone call had ended with a quiet agreement to meet later in the week, a tentative decision born from necessity as much as from unresolved feelings. But before that moment could arrive, life intervened unexpectedly, shifting their carefully laid plans into urgent motion. Sarah woke that Thursday morning to an early call from her veterinarian's office, a gentle voice delivering news she'd been dreading. Max had suddenly fallen ill overnight. Sarah's heart tightened painfully in her chest, panic fluttering gently beneath the carefully composed surface she'd maintained. Despite their separation, David had remained Max's registered owner along with her, and as such, had also been notified. When she arrived at the animal hospital, Sarah found David already sitting quietly in the waiting area, eyes fixed anxiously. On the sterile white floor, hands clasped tightly in silent apprehension. Their eyes met briefly, a rush of quiet understanding passing between them, overriding years of silence and distance. In that moment, nothing mattered more than the quiet mutual dread they both felt for the creature who had once represented their happiest times. Sarah took the seat beside David, leaving a respectful space between them, a physical distance mirroring the gentle emotional gap they had yet to bridge. Neither spoke at first, each quietly absorbing the uncertain atmosphere, their silence marked not by coldness, but by the shared tension of waiting. Eventually, it was David who gently broke the silence. His voice, softer and more vulnerable than she remembered, carried an undertone of deep regret. "I keep thinking," he murmured, eyes fixed on his folded hands, "of all the times I wasn't there for him. I thought distance would make it easier for everyone. But maybe that was just selfish." Sarah listened quietly, understanding slowly dawning as she recognized that David's words were about far more than just their beloved pet. She sighed softly, choosing her words carefully, sensing that this was a moment for gentle honesty, not harsh judgments. "We both made choices, David," she replied quietly, her voice gentle yet firm. "Choices we thought were right, even if they turned out differently than we hoped. We did our best with what we knew then." David turned slightly, his gaze meeting hers, eyes shadowed yet filled with a quiet sincerity she'd forgotten he could express so clearly. "But did we really, Sarah? Or did we simply choose silence because we were afraid to truly face each other?" Question hung softly between them, a gentle accusation neither could easily dismiss. Sarah felt a quiet pang of sadness, knowing he was right. She had been equally guilty of retreating into silence, choosing solitude and quiet resignation over the complexity of honesty and confrontation. Before she could respond, the vet gently approached, expression solemn yet compassionate. She explained softly that Max's condition had worsened significantly. They could spend time with him now, but decisions would need to be made soon. The gentle finality of her words settled heavily between Sarah and David, each understanding clearly the painful reality awaiting them. Quietly, they rose together, hearts heavy, following the veterinarian down the softly lit corridor to the small room where Max lay quietly, curled on a soft blanket, breathing slow and uneven. Sarah felt her eyes fill instantly with tears at the sight of their beloved companion, the gentle soul who had once embodied their shared happiness, now quietly approaching the end of his journey. As they knelt softly beside him, Max stirred gently, eyes opening slowly, recognizing immediately the two people he loved most. He wagged his tail weakly, a soft thumping sound against the blanket that nearly broke Sarah's heart with its gentle persistence. David reached out, his hand gently stroking Max's soft fur, murmuring quiet reassurances, words he likely spoke, as much for himself as for the dog they both adored. Sarah watched quietly, feeling deeply grateful in that painful moment that they were here together, able to share this gentle goodbye rather than facing it alone. Her hand gently joined David's, resting softly against Max's fur, their fingers lightly brushing. A quiet acknowledgement of their shared grief, comfort offered and accepted in gentle silence. Minutes stretched slowly, each second quietly. Precious, filled with quiet memories of afternoons spent together, evenings curled on the sofa, Max nestled between them. Sarah remembered the countless quiet moments Max had filled with unconditional love, how he'd been there through both joy and sorrow, quietly loyal even when their lives shifted apart. Eventually, Max closed his eyes again, breathing softer, quieter, as if he knew his family was finally whole again, if only briefly. Sarah leaned forward, whispering gently to him, voice thick with restrained tears. "It's okay, sweetheart. You've been the best part of us for so long. We'll be okay. You can rest now." As she spoke these gentle words, David's hand quietly tightened around hers, a subtle, tender gesture of solidarity, support, and quiet affection that spoke volumes without words. In that moment, Sarah understood deeply, clearly, that despite their years apart, the quiet bond they'd once shared had never truly broken. It had simply lain dormant, waiting gently beneath layers of silence and misunderstanding. They stayed quietly beside Max, holding vigil together, each silently praying that he felt their love, their gentle gratitude for all he had given them. And as they sat there united in quiet sorrow, Sarah felt her heart gently breaking, not just for Max, but for all the quiet years they'd wasted apart, silent and separate, when perhaps honesty and courage might have quietly healed what they'd assumed broken beyond repair. The quiet ticking of a clock somewhere in the veterinary hospital gently punctuated the silent vigil Sarah and David held at Max's side, marking each second of the dwindling time they had left. As they sat there together, Sarah's mind drifted quietly through countless memories. The first day they'd brought Max home, nights spent coaxing him through thunderstorms, quiet walks under starlit skies, moments she hadn't realized were precious until they began slipping softly away. David gently stroked Max's head, his thumbs softly brushing the golden fur, his voice barely above a whisper as he murmured quiet reassurances. "You've done so well, old friend," he said softly, eyes glistening, though tears never fully spilled over. Sarah watched him quietly, her heart quietly aching with tenderness and sorrow, not only for Max, but also for the man beside her who'd quietly carried the burden of misunderstood intentions for so long. A gentle knock at the door interrupted their quiet reverie. The veterinarian stepped in softly, compassion etched in her quiet gaze. She explained gently that it was time, her voice carrying quiet sympathy and patience, understanding clearly the weight of this moment for them both. Sarah nodded softly, her heart feeling quietly shattered, yet profoundly grateful for these last, precious moments together. As they prepared to say their final gentle farewell, Sarah leaned down to Max, pressing her lips softly against his fur, whispering words of quiet love and gratitude for the countless gentle lessons he'd taught her. About unconditional love, her voice trembled gently, quiet but resolute. "Thank you, Max. You've shown us more love than we ever knew we deserved." David leaned close, his voice quiet yet deeply sincere as he added softly, "We'll never forget you, Max. You've been our best companion and friend. Rest now, buddy. You've earned it." Together, their hands gently rested on Max's soft body, offering him comfort and companionship as he peacefully slipped away, leaving behind a quiet, profound emptiness in the room and in their hearts. The vet quietly withdrew, leaving Sarah and David alone once more in gentle, grief-filled silence. Sarah closed her eyes, breathing deeply, feeling tears finally slipping quietly down her cheeks, releasing years of quiet grief, sorrow, and buried regrets she had silently carried. David gently squeezed her hand, his presence a quiet anchor, in this profound moment of vulnerability. Eventually, they stood quietly, each feeling the gentle ache of loss settling deeply within their bones. David spoke first, his voice rough yet gently hopeful. "Sarah," he began softly, "would you like me to walk you home?" Sarah nodded slowly, understanding that right now, solitude held little comfort. They left the clinic side by side, walking quietly through the gentle twilight toward Sarah's small house on Elm Street, their silence companionable and softly, comforting rather than tense or awkward. As they reached her porch, Sarah paused gently, turning to face David. The porch light softly illuminated the quiet lines etched by years into their faces, marks of experience, love, and loss. "Would you like to come in for a moment?" she asked softly, understanding this was not simply a polite invitation, but a quiet acknowledgement of something deeper between them, something quietly unresolved, yet tenderly hopeful. David hesitated briefly, then nodded gently, following her, quietly inside. The house felt different now, quieter, emptier without Max, yet somehow warmer too, with David there. His quiet presence filling spaces Sarah hadn't realized were empty. She poured them both cups of tea, the quiet ritual familiar, yet carrying a deeper significance tonight. They sat quietly together on the old sofa, the space between them gentle, yet noticeably smaller than before. David spoke softly after a long pause, his voice thoughtful, introspective. "I've missed this, Sarah. Not just you, but us. The quiet moments, the way we could just be together without needing words." Sarah sighed gently, nodding slowly, eyes reflecting softly the lamplight. "Me too. I thought I'd learn to live without it, but seeing you again, tonight especially, I realized I'd simply been existing, not truly living." They shared a quiet glance, the years of separation falling away gently between them, revealing a quiet truth that had always quietly lingered beneath their shared silence. David took Sarah's hand softly, their fingers quietly intertwining as they sat in comfortable silence, each quietly reflecting on the significance of this gentle reunion. As the clock quietly ticked on, Sarah spoke again, her voice quiet, yet clear, acknowledging softly what both had come to understand. "Maybe we needed this time apart, not to forget, but to remember who we truly are. Maybe our mistakes were just quiet lessons, teaching us how to love better." David nodded gently, thoughtful. Perhaps love isn't about never hurting each other, but about being brave enough to forgive, even when it's difficult. They sat quietly for several minutes, each absorbing the quiet truth of David's words. Outside, the gentle rain had stopped, the night air clear and softly illuminated by distant stars. Eventually, David stood, realizing softly it was time to leave. They walked slowly to the door, pausing again beneath the gentle glow of the porch lamp. He turned to her, his eyes gentle yet hesitant. "Sarah," he said quietly, his voice carrying quiet determination and vulnerability. "I don't know exactly what comes next for us, but I do know that tonight, sharing this with you felt right, felt true." Sarah smiled softly, understanding deeply, gently, exactly what he meant. "I feel the same," she whispered quietly. "Maybe it's time we stop letting fear and silence make our choices for us." David nodded, reaching out gently to touch her cheek, his fingers softly warm against her skin. "Let's talk soon," he murmured, the promise quiet yet genuine. Sarah watched quietly as David walked away, his figure softly disappearing into the night, feeling gently hopeful for the first time in years. Standing alone beneath the quiet starlit sky, she understood clearly that endings, no matter how painful, often quietly carried the promise of new beginnings. She turned slowly back inside, gently shutting the door behind her, understanding deeply the quiet lesson this painful yet beautiful night had taught her. That love, even when lost, could still softly guide her towards something meaningful, something true. Perhaps the hardest goodbyes quietly reveal the most essential truths about who we really are. Have you ever lost something precious, only to gain a deeper truth about yourself? I'd love to hear your story. Please share below. Sarah stood silently in the doorway, watching the spot where David had disappeared into the shadows of Elm Street, his footsteps fading softly until there was only quiet emptiness. She closed the door gently behind her, the faint click of the latch echoing quietly through the silent house, emphasizing its sudden, stark vacancy. She moved slowly toward the living room, each step feeling heavier than the last, as though the reality of Max's absence had settled deeply into her bones, weighing her down with quiet inevitability. The house seemed to exhale softly around her, a space too large now for one person, its quiet corners suddenly amplifying the emptiness within her heart. Her eyes drifted over familiar furniture. The old sofa still shaped gently by Max's frequent naps, his favorite blanket draped loosely over the armrest, untouched since yesterday. Sarah found herself instinctively reaching out, fingers brushing lightly over the soft fabric, hoping for some residual warmth, some quiet echo of his presence, but finding only gentle coldness instead. She sank down slowly onto the sofa, her hands folded softly in her lap, eyes fixed quietly on the empty spot near the fireplace where Max had always curled up, breathing softly in peaceful sleep. The silence seemed deeper, heavier now, without the quiet rhythm of his breathing or the gentle rustle of his paws stretching lazily against the rug. Sarah's gaze fell gently upon a faded tennis ball, tucked quietly beside the hearth, its bright green now dulled by years of gentle play. A small, almost imperceptible smile crossed her lips, recalling how Max used to nudge it softly toward her feet, eyes hopeful yet patient, always waiting quietly for the simple joy of a shared moment. Her chest tightened softly, not with tears, but with a profound quiet ache, the silent acknowledgement of moments she had always assumed would last forever, but which now existed only as fragile, precious memories. Eventually, Sarah rose again, wandering quietly toward the kitchen, her motions gentle, almost aimless, guided more by habit than conscious intention. She reached automatically for 2 cups, pausing softly halfway through the motion, realizing with a quiet pang of sorrow that this morning ritual had suddenly become meaningless. With a gentle sigh, she placed the second cup slowly back onto the shelf, feeling the weight of its emptiness far more deeply than the physical object itself suggested. Pouring tea into a single cup felt strangely difficult, the simple act becoming a quiet symbol of loss, a gentle reminder of how quickly life's familiar patterns could dissolve into uncertainty and loneliness. Sarah carried her cup softly back to the living room, sipping quietly, her eyes drawn again to the carefully arranged photographs along the bookshelf. Max's face gazed back gently from several frames, his eyes bright with innocent joy, captured forever in quiet moments of playful affection. One photograph stood out particularly, tucked quietly behind the others, almost hidden, yet impossible, now to ignore. David's arm was draped gently around Sarah's shoulder, both smiling softly into the camera. Max nestled comfortably between them. Sarah picked it up slowly, her fingertips tracing gently over the glass, as though she could somehow reach through and softly touch the happiness and peace captured in that quiet instant. Her mind wandered softly, revisiting the gentle conversation she'd shared with David earlier, their quiet acknowledgement of mutual misunderstanding and regret. She found herself quietly wondering if, perhaps, all those quiet years spent apart had been unnecessary, time quietly lost, not through deliberate choices but through gentle neglect and silence, neither daring to confront truths that might have changed everything. Sarah carefully replaced the photograph, feeling a quiet sadness mingling gently with resignation. She understood now, deeply and clearly, that this quiet emptiness within her wasn't simply about Max or David. It was about the quiet choices she'd made, the quiet moments she'd allowed to pass by unspoken, and the gentle truths she had silently buried in fear of pain. Moving softly to the window, Sarah gazed quietly out into the darkness. The street gently illuminated by dim lamplight, the world beyond peaceful, yet indifferent to the quiet ache inside her. She knew with quiet certainty that healing wouldn't come swiftly or easily, but she also recognized gently that facing this emptiness, fully, honestly, was the first quiet step toward finding peace. The clock in the hall chimed softly, marking midnight with a quiet insistence that reminded Sarah gently how quickly the hours slipped away when lost in thought. Still standing quietly at the window, she watched as gentle rain began to fall again, droplets softly tapping against the glass, each small rhythmic sound echoing gently within her heart. The street below glistened faintly in the soft lamplight, the reflections shimmering quietly, ephemeral as memories. Turning slowly from the window, Sarah moved gently toward her bedroom, the hallway seeming longer, emptier now, its quiet stillness, a soft reminder of all she had quietly lost. Passing the small nook where Max once slept peacefully, she paused briefly, fingers gently touching the bare spot where his bed had rested. Her heart tightened softly, acknowledging the quiet permanence of his absence, the silence deeper now without the comfort of his gentle, breathing presence nearby. Entering her room, Sarah undressed quietly, each movement slow and deliberate, as though she hoped gentle routine might somehow soothe the quiet turmoil inside. Her reflection in the mirror caught her attention briefly, a face softly worn by time and quietly shadowed by recent grief, yet still carrying quiet resilience. Beneath the surface, she recognized gently in herself the quiet strength she'd developed through years of quiet acceptance. And yet tonight, that strength felt fragile, delicate, worn thin by gentle sorrow. Sliding into bed, Sarah lay quietly, eyes open, fixed softly on the familiar patterns of the ceiling, faintly illuminated by gentle moonlight filtering through parted curtains. The house settled softly around her, its quiet creaks and sighs familiar yet subtly changed now, carrying a new, gentle sense of emptiness she could neither fully explain nor escape. She knew deeply, gently, that this quiet ache would linger, not easily healed or quickly forgotten, yet perhaps eventually softened by time's gentle passage. Closing her eyes gently, she found herself quietly revisiting memories she'd tucked carefully away, moments of simple happiness she'd quietly overlooked until now. Afternoons spent quietly reading in companionable silence, evenings curled warmly on the sofa, Max nestled gently between them, offering quiet comfort without demanding attention. Sarah felt quietly ashamed of the moments she'd taken for granted, her quiet assumption that such gentle happiness could continue forever without nurturing. She rolled gently onto her side, breathing quietly into the stillness, softly wondering if David, lying awake somewhere else, felt similarly, if his quiet heart also reflected softly on the gentle truths revealed in their recent reunion. She considered quietly reaching out again, yet hesitated softly, understanding deeply that certain quiet realizations required solitude first, the gentle space to truly understand one's own heart before sharing it again with another. In the gentle darkness, Sarah allowed herself the quiet freedom to admit softly that perhaps the deepest loss she felt wasn't simply Max, or even David, but rather the quiet loss of herself, the woman she once was, carefree and gently hopeful, unburdened by silent regrets and guarded emotions. She recognized softly that reclaiming this gentle, lost part of herself required courage, The quiet bravery to face truths she'd avoided. The gentle strength to embrace vulnerability she'd spent years quietly fearing. With a gentle sigh, Sarah curled softly beneath the blankets, drawing them close around her, seeking quiet comfort in their familiar warmth. Sleep still eluded her gently, yet in its absence came quiet clarity, an understanding softly dawning within her heart that perhaps life's greatest lessons lay not in avoiding pain, but in quietly accepting it, learning gently from it, and eventually growing beyond its gentle boundaries. She knew softly now, more clearly than ever, that the quiet emptiness left behind by Max's departure, and even David's quiet absence, was not a void meant to remain empty forever, but rather gentle space created for something new, something quietly beautiful yet unseen, waiting patiently to grow. As the soft rain continued gently outside her window, Sarah felt a quiet, comforting sense of hope begin softly stirring within her, a quiet acknowledgement that while loss was inevitable, the gentle renewal of hope and possibility was equally so. She closed her eyes once more, finally feeling a gentle peace settling quietly into the spaces once filled by sorrow. Sarah drifted softly toward sleep, heart gently comforted by the quiet realization that tomorrow offered another chance. Another quiet step forward into a life perhaps not entirely new, yet gently reshaped by quiet courage, quiet forgiveness, and quiet hope. In the gentle days that followed, Sarah quietly attempted to return to her familiar routine. Yet despite her best efforts, the house remained subtly different, its silence deeper, shadows softer, yet somehow heavier, as though the walls themselves gently mourned Max's absence. Friends visited, offering quiet support, filling brief moments of comfort. But after each departure, Sarah felt the emptiness return, gentle yet insistent. One quiet afternoon, as autumn sunlight filtered gently through her window, Sarah found herself idly sorting through old books she'd long neglected. Her fingers brushed gently against a worn copy of an old favorite, its pages slightly yellowed, the spine soft from repeated readings. As she pulled it gently from the shelf, a small envelope, aged and slightly crumpled, fluttered softly to the floor. She reached down curiously, lifting the envelope with quiet wonder. Her heart tightened softly as she recognized David's handwriting, once again, faded slightly by the gentle passing of years. Confused yet intrigued, Sarah settled softly into her favorite armchair, carefully opening the delicate flap, breath shallow with quiet anticipation. Inside, nestled quietly between two thin sheets of paper, was a letter dated nearly 3 years earlier, just months before David first announced his decision to leave. Sarah's hands trembled gently as she unfolded it slowly, eyes scanning the carefully written lines, heart quietly pounding with unexpected emotion. "Sarah," the letter began, words gently familiar, yet startlingly honest. "I write this knowing you may never read it. Not sure if I'll ever find the courage to leave it where you'll find it easily. Yet tonight, as you sleep quietly beside me, I find myself unable to silence the quiet truth within my heart. I know lately you sense something's changed. Perhaps you worry my silence means I've stopped loving you, that I've grown distant or indifferent. But the truth is quite the opposite. I love you more deeply now than ever before, yet I fear I'm losing you. Not to another person, but to my own quiet failures. I watch you each day, Sarah, quietly struggling to keep our life steady, even as pressures at my work keep pulling me further away. I've seen how gently you've adjusted to loneliness, quietly resigned, never complaining or asking for more than I seem able to give. Yet it breaks my heart softly, silently, every day, watching your quiet acceptance of this half-life we've slowly created. Tonight, though, something quietly changed within me, watching you gently asleep, your face peaceful yet quietly shadowed by the sadness I know I've caused. I've realized that perhaps silence isn't kindness after all, Perhaps true kindness means speaking even when it's difficult, admitting quietly that I'm afraid of losing us. Not because I don't love you enough, but because I love you so deeply. It terrifies me. Tomorrow, Sarah, I promise you quietly yet sincerely, I'll find the courage to tell you this openly. I'll sit with you, share my fears, listen to yours, and together we'll quietly figure out how to fix what's slowly broken between us. Please know, whatever happens, I choose us. Always. Even if I've failed quietly to show it lately. All my love, always, David. Sarah sat quietly, the letter gently shaking in her hands, her vision blurred softly by tears, not tears of sorrow, but quiet regret. This letter, never found, never read until now, represented everything she'd silently wished, David had said long ago. Each carefully chosen word gently dismantled years of quiet misunderstandings, revealing softly that the distance between them had never been about waning love, but rather about quiet fears and unspoken truths. Her heart ached gently, knowing that somehow this crucial, quiet message had slipped unnoticed into obscurity, hidden away accidentally inside a forgotten book, one she'd often meant to revisit but somehow never did. Sarah realized quietly, painfully, how easily life could shift, how gently and quietly important moments could be missed, forever altering paths that might otherwise have remained intertwined. She sat quietly in the fading light, letter pressed gently against her chest, understanding softly yet profoundly that their quiet separation had never been inevitable. Instead, it had quietly arisen from missed connections, silent moments unseized, and gentle truths left unspoken. As she gently refolded the letter, placing it softly back into its envelope, Sarah knew deeply that this quiet discovery changed everything she'd ever understood about their separation, leaving her with gentle, poignant thoughts of what might have been, had this quiet confession been shared openly years before. Sarah remained seated quietly for a long while, letter gently, clasped between her fingers, her gaze unfocused, lost softly in contemplation. The revelation she'd just uncovered rested quietly within her, not harshly painful but poignantly bittersweet, an echo of gentle regret and the quiet understanding that their story, while beautiful in its quiet imperfections, had been shaped, as much by the things unsaid as by those they'd spoken aloud. Eventually, she rose softly from the chair, carefully placing the envelope on the table where it lay quietly, a tangible reminder of gentle truths that had been hidden for far too long. She wandered slowly through the rooms of her house, each corner gently suffused now with quiet reflection, each familiar object softly echoing the life they'd once shared, and the quiet possibilities they'd unknowingly allowed to slip away. The kitchen seemed especially quiet now, the silence softly broken only by the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the quiet drip of water from the faucet. Ordinary, small sounds that somehow underscored the quiet absence of voices and laughter that once filled these spaces. Her eyes drifted toward the spot where Max used to sit quietly, patiently waiting for treats or affection, a small, gentle shadow of the unconditional love he'd given freely, quietly, without hesitation. Sarah found herself gently replaying their quiet morning routines, shared cups of coffee sipped slowly at the table, conversations about plans for the day spoken in soft, unhurried tones. How had she missed those quiet signals David had surely sent, subtle yet genuine efforts he made? Toward openness and vulnerability? Perhaps her own quiet fear of deeper pain had prevented her from truly seeing, truly hearing, truly understanding what had always been gently offered. She sighed softly, recognizing quietly within herself the gentle, stubborn independence she'd always cherished yet now understood had quietly become a barrier, preventing her from fully embracing the quiet, shared strength that true partnership could offer. Sarah knew gently but clearly that David's quiet departure had been shaped as much by her silence as by his. each quietly assuming they knew best how to protect the other, each quietly failing to recognize that true protection lay not in silence, but in honest vulnerability. Standing softly by the kitchen window, watching the gentle rain continue its quiet rhythm, Sarah considered deeply what to do next. Not out of impulsivity or panic, but with a calm, quiet determination born of newfound clarity. She understood gently, profoundly, that while she couldn't change their quiet past, she could still gently honor the truths they'd quietly missed. Truths finally spoken clearly through David's long-hidden letter. She reached quietly for her phone, pausing gently as she considered her words carefully. Her fingers softly hovered over the keypad, hesitating only a moment before typing a gentle, simple message, choosing honesty and openness over continued quiet silence. David, I found the letter you wrote 3 years ago, the one I never saw until today. I just needed you to know that I finally understand now. Thank you truly for writing it, even if I read it too late. She sent the message softly, her heart quiet yet gently resolute, knowing clearly this wasn't about reclaiming the past, but about quietly honoring truths they both deserved to acknowledge. Within moments, her phone softly chimed, a simple, quiet reply from David, carrying gentle warmth and mutual understanding. I'm glad you finally found it. Perhaps this timing is exactly right. I'd love to talk more whenever you're ready. Sarah's lips curved gently into a soft, quiet smile, a smile touched by gentle hope rather than expectation, by quiet gratitude rather than regret. She realized softly, yet profoundly, that while life could never promise clarity or ease, it often quietly offered second chances in ways least expected, hidden gently within moments of quiet revelation and tender honesty. She placed her phone quietly, back on the counter, returning softly to the letter on the table, gently folding it once more, carefully tucking it back into its envelope. She knew she would revisit these quiet words many times in the gentle days ahead, not to dwell in regret, but to softly remind herself of the quiet power of truth, the gentle courage it took to share one's heart fully, even when it risked pain or disappointment. Sarah stood quietly, breathing softly into the peaceful silence around her, feeling deeply comforted by the quiet certainty that life, though shaped often by quiet mistakes and missed opportunities, always quietly provided the possibility of gentle healing, if only one had the quiet courage to embrace it. As she turned softly toward her bedroom, she whispered gently into the quiet, empty room, a simple promise spoken as much to herself as to David and the memory of Max. From now on, no more silence. Not when truth could quietly change everything. Sometimes the greatest truths lie hidden quietly, waiting patiently to be discovered. Have you ever uncovered a hidden truth that changed your path? I'd love to hear your story. Please share with me below. Several months quietly slipped by, seasons gently shifting from autumn's warm colors to winter's peaceful chill, and eventually into the delicate blossoms of early spring. Time moved gently forward, carrying Sarah slowly yet steadily away from the sharp edges of grief and regret toward a softer, quieter kind of acceptance and understanding. Life resumed its gentle rhythms, though subtly reshaped now by the quiet lessons Sarah had learned. Her small house gradually regained its warmth, not filled entirely by the same joyful sounds as before, yet softly welcoming new, quieter comforts. A fresh bouquet placed gently each week on the table, curtains softly opened to invite in morning. Sunlight, quiet evenings spent immersed in books that offered comfort rather than escape. Each morning now, Sarah made just one cup of coffee, savoring it slowly at the kitchen table, no longer haunted by the empty chair across from her. The quiet absence she once found painful had gently transformed into something softer, a peaceful, gentle acknowledgement of the beauty once shared, even if now past. She no longer felt burdened by silence. Instead, she had quietly befriended, it discovering within its gentle stillness a kind of wisdom she'd overlooked before. Her bookshop became busier, filled not only with familiar faces, but new visitors who quietly shared their own stories, each exchange gently reminding her how interconnected life's quiet journeys truly were. Sarah found herself listening more deeply, offering quiet comfort or gentle understanding where needed, her own experiences quietly shaping her interactions with newfound empathy and warmth. Occasionally, letters arrived from Emma, each filled with gentle encouragement and quiet updates about life in New York. Her daughter's quiet maturity and steady affection reminded Sarah of the quiet strengths within herself, strengths she'd often overlooked yet now gently nurtured. Their bond had deepened softly, quietly, becoming more authentic, honest, and quietly supportive through the gentle wisdom they exchanged. David, too, remained gently present, though their interactions evolved softly into something new, quietly, genuine, carefully honest, neither rushing nor forcing reconciliation, but softly allowing space for friendship and quiet understanding to blossom naturally. Sarah appreciated deeply this gentle patience between them, the mutual respect quietly guiding their renewed relationship toward a place of quiet trust and gentle clarity. One gentle morning in early spring, Sarah stood quietly by the back door, sipping tea as sunlight filtered softly through blossoming cherry trees. She'd planted a small sapling months earlier in the garden, an act of quiet remembrance for Max, whose gentle, loving spirit remained subtly present in the rhythms of her daily life. The young tree had quietly taken root, growing slowly, yet steadily, its quiet strength symbolic of her own quiet healing and steady growth. As Sarah watched the soft petals drift gently onto the grass, she felt quietly grateful for the gentle resilience she'd discovered within herself, the quiet connections she'd nurtured with those she loved, and even the gentle heartache she'd endured, for each quiet struggle had softly guided her toward deeper truths about herself and about life itself. She heard a gentle knock at the front door, interrupting her thoughts softly. Opening it slowly, Sarah found Anna standing there, holding a small basket filled gently with homemade muffins, her row. Smile soft and quietly knowing. "Thought you might enjoy these," Anna said gently, stepping inside comfortably, familiar as always. Sarah smiled softly, grateful for the steady, quiet companionship Anna had provided, especially in recent months. They sat together gently at the kitchen table, sharing stories and quiet laughter. The morning filled softly with easy conversation and gentle, comforting silences, moments Sarah now treasured deeply. When Anna eventually left, promising to return soon, Sarah quietly lingered by the door, watching her friend walk softly away down Elm Street, the neighborhood quietly alive with gentle sounds of spring. Standing there, Sarah felt deeply at peace, her heart quietly embracing the gentle uncertainty of the future, free at last from the weight of quiet regrets. As she softly closed the door, she glanced gently at the photo still displayed prominently. On the shelf, herself, David, and Max smiling quietly back at her, a gentle reminder of the love once shared. She knew deeply now, more clearly than ever, that love's quiet echoes endured, gently guiding her forward, even when the paths of life diverged softly apart. Later that evening, Sarah settled gently into her favorite armchair, pulling a soft blanket comfortably around her shoulders as the evening shadows began to stretch quietly across the living room floor. Outside, the sun dipped softly below the horizon, painting the sky in gentle pastels of lavender and peach, colors that seemed quietly symbolic of endings and beginnings intertwined, each softly inseparable from the other. In the quiet solitude of twilight, Sarah allowed her mind to gently wander once again through memories now softened by time. Each quiet recollection, even those tinged with gentle sadness, brought not the sharp pangs of loss, but rather a quiet, comforting gratitude, a gentle understanding that every shared moment, every quiet joy and gentle sorrow, had quietly shaped her into the woman she'd quietly grown to become. She knew deeply now that love never truly ended. It simply transformed quietly, reshaping itself gently within the quiet corners of one's heart, lingering softly in subtle reminders, an old photograph, a gentle breeze carrying familiar scents, or even in the quiet solitude that softly embraced her each evening. These quiet echoes were no longer painful. They were gentle reminders of how deeply she'd loved and been loved in return. Sarah reached softly for a journal she had started keeping, carefully opening its worn pages filled gently with quiet reflections, thoughts carefully penned during moments of gentle clarity. She wrote quietly, her pen gliding gently across the page, capturing softly the quiet realizations of the day. Today, I understood gently and clearly that letting go doesn't mean forgetting, nor does it diminish the quiet significance of the love we once shared. Letting go simply means softly making peace with what has been and embracing gently what can still become. Perhaps our deepest losses quietly teach us the greatest lessons, not through pain, but through gentle reminders of our strength and quiet resilience. She paused gently, considering her words, her heart quietly content with their quiet honesty. Closing the journal softly, Sarah leaned back, eyes drifting gently toward the window, where stars were quietly beginning to appear in the deepening night sky, each softly glowing as if to gently remind her of the countless quiet possibilities still awaiting her. Her phone chimed softly, pulling her gently back into the present. Picking it up slowly, she smiled quietly at David's name, illuminated softly on the screen. His message was simple, yet filled with quiet warmth. "Just thinking of you today. Hope you're well." Sarah's heart fluttered gently, not with anxious anticipation, but with quiet gratitude for the gentle friendship and genuine connection they'd rediscovered. She responded softly, thoughtfully choosing her words. "I'm well. Thank you for always checking in. It means a lot. Talk soon?" The reply came gently, without hesitation. "Always. Good night, Sarah." She set the phone down softly, the quiet exchange leaving her gently comforted, grateful not for romantic declarations or dramatic reunions, but for the gentle, steady presence of someone who still quietly cared, even after all they'd gently endured. Outside, the world grew quieter still, the gentle hum of evening softly enveloping her home in peaceful serenity. Sarah rose gently from her chair, walking softly through rooms that had quietly witnessed her joys, sorrows, and gentle growth. Each quiet step reminded her softly that healing wasn't a dramatic transformation, but rather a quiet, continuous journey, gently unfolding with each passing day. Standing once again by her bedroom window, Sarah looked softly out at the quiet garden below, illuminated gently by moonlight. The small tree she'd planted for Max stood quietly strong beneath the gentle night sky, leaves softly rustling as though whispering gentle reassurances that everything was quietly as it should be. She whispered gently into the night, her voice, quiet yet filled with newfound strength and gentle acceptance. "Good night, Max. Good night, David. Thank you both for everything." Turning quietly away, she slipped softly into bed, her heart gently peaceful, quietly hopeful. She closed her eyes softly, knowing deeply now that true happiness wasn't found in perfect endings or dramatic reconciliations, but rather in quiet moments of acceptance, gentle forgiveness, and quiet courage to face each new day openly. And in the quiet darkness, Sarah drifted gently into sleep, softly comforted by a truth she now quietly understood clearly, that life's greatest beauty often lay gently hidden within its quietest moments, waiting patiently for hearts brave enough to softly embrace them. Our stories never truly end. They gently continue, reshaped by love, loss, and quiet resilience. If you found comfort or truth in this story, please subscribe and stay with me. Let's discover together how beautifully life unfolds in quiet, unexpected ways.